In the middle of the winter of 2003, something unprecedented occurred aboard one of NASA's orbital observation stations. It began as a routine monitoring of deep space. The central server of the Hubble Space Telescope recorded an unusual electromagnetic emission originating from a region far beyond the solar system. At first, the signal appeared to be a technical anomaly, random spikes on the data charts, unpredictable in both frequency and amplitude. However, with each passing day, the anomaly grew more consistent and, most disturbingly, repeated at intervals that did not match any known stellar cycles. Scientists initially sought rational explanations. Could it be a malfunctioning satellite? A meteor shower? Space debris? Every possibility was meticulously checked, and all were ruled out. Soon, the signal began to reveal an astonishing characteristic. Its spectrum contained repeated patterns resembling artificial coding, as if someone, or something, had intentionally embedded a message within it. At NASA, the idea that the source could be extraterrestrial was unspoken, yet the implication hung heavily in the air. Internal reports quickly reflected growing concern. Documented under the strict title, Protocol 47B, the signal was classified, and any mention outside the designated research team was strictly forbidden. The memorandum warned that public disclosure could trigger panic and destabilize public perception. The scientists analyzing the data realized that they might be witnessing the most significant discovery in the history of space exploration, but simultaneously felt the weight of unprecedented pressure from agency leadership. Do not publish. Do not discuss. Close all communication channels. As the days passed, the team became increasingly obsessed with decoding the signal. 7 researchers devoted upwards of 8 hours each day to painstaking analysis, searching for any discernible pattern in the erratic sequences. Some noted striking similarities with archaic radioastronomical waveforms studied in the mid-20th century, while others described the work as interacting with something that shouldn't exist. Each new chart, each successive visualization, intensified the sense that the anomaly was not merely a physical phenomenon but seemed to affect human perception itself. Soon, the signal began manifesting across multiple independent instruments, Earth-observing satellites, deep space radio transmitters, and datasets previously believed to be unrelated. It was as if space itself were attempting to communicate, a message only discernible to those attentive enough to listen. This prompted NASA to establish a clandestine task force, officially non-existent, to study the anomaly. Every member signed a strict non-disclosure agreement. Leaks would result in immediate termination and potential legal action. Within weeks, leadership made decisions that would later be known only among the most trusted scientists. External agencies and universities were explicitly prohibited from pursuing any research related to the signal. Internal reports cautioned, disclosure could compromise not only the agency's reputation but also provoke uncontrolled public reaction. In case of leaks, activate suppression protocols immediately. At the time, few could comprehend the full gravity of this directive. The anomaly's regularity intensified. Data from disparate telescopes not only matched but appeared to complement one another. The signal seemed capable of self-correction, ensuring it could be observed simultaneously from multiple points in space. No existing scientific model could explain this phenomenon. Debates erupted within the labs. Some argued that the source might be a form of extraterrestrial intelligence. Others insisted it was an extraordinary cosmic event, as yet undocumented by science. Internal assessments confirmed one unsettling truth: the signal defied known physical laws. While NASA management deliberated on how to conceal the discovery, the researchers understood that this was only the beginning of a sequence of events that would include lost equipment, classified missions, and unexplained leaks, events that would forever alter humanity's perception of the cosmos. And yet, no one could anticipate the scale of what lay ahead. This signal, arriving from the silent void beyond our solar system, would not only challenge the boundaries of human knowledge but also set in motion a chain of secrecy and intrigue, ensuring that what they had found would remain hidden from the world, at least for a while. As the mysterious signal continued to register across multiple NASA instruments, the agency's internal atmosphere shifted from scientific curiosity to controlled caution. the higher echelons of leadership convened emergency meetings behind closed doors, discussing not only the implications of the discovery, but the risks it posed to public perception and international stability. The discussion was not about understanding the signal, it was about containment. From that moment, the directive was clear: information about the anomaly must remain classified, accessible only to a select few. Internal memos marked "Top Secret, Eyes Only" instructed scientists to document findings meticulously but to refrain from sharing results beyond the immediate research circle. Every analysis, every chart, every speculative note required review and approval from a specialized oversight committee created solely to monitor the anomaly. Even routine data transmissions from orbiting telescopes were subject to a new level of scrutiny. The entire program was effectively sealed off from the outside world, under the pretext of preventing misinformation and maintaining national security. The scientists tasked with decoding the signal faced an unprecedented tension. On one hand, they had stumbled upon a phenomenon that could redefine humanity's understanding of the universe. On the other, they were now operating under constant supervision, their research filtered through bureaucratic channels designed to minimize exposure. Internal communications became heavily coded. Even casual conversations in corridors were discouraged, as any slip could be interpreted as a breach of protocol. Despite these restrictions, small fractures began to appear within the research team. Some scientists felt suffocated by the secrecy, arguing that the signal's importance outweighed potential public panic. Others feared that revealing any detail could trigger political repercussions or worse, misinterpretation by foreign powers. Disputes over methodology and ethics grew increasingly tense. One internal report noted, almost casually, that the pressure of concealment is already affecting cognitive judgment and team cohesion. Meanwhile, the anomaly itself seemed to grow in both complexity and intensity. Previously subtle fluctuations began forming patterns that were impossible to ignore. Engineers noticed that the signal's frequency sometimes aligned with orbital paths of known celestial objects, as though the source was aware of Earth's observation points. Attempts to test hypotheses often yielded contradictory results. Instruments designed to detect and isolate the anomaly instead amplified it in ways that defied established physical models. This led some researchers to speculate, privately, that they were not merely observing a natural phenomenon, but an intelligence capable of adapting to human attempts at study. Within the agency, the classification measures became more draconian. Any mention of the signal in reports, internal emails, or logbooks required an approval code and multiple layers of authentication. External collaborators, who had once assisted with data analysis, were quietly removed from projects without explanation. A small cadre of engineers and scientists became the sole custodians of the anomaly's data. Their work, once driven by curiosity, was now dictated by secrecy. The sense of urgency intensified, not only to understand the signal but to ensure that no trace of it escaped NASA's walls. This period also marked the first direct interference with ongoing missions. Satellites and probes capable of observing regions aligned with the signal were retasked or deactivated. Requests for data from international partners were denied. Even archival data, some dating back decades, was sequestered and placed under controlled access. A confidential internal directive stated plainly, "Do not allow any uncontrolled observation or analysis that could lead to public awareness." This marked a turning point. The anomaly was no longer just a scientific curiosity. It had become a cosmic secret under strict federal protection. Yet, despite the tight controls, curiosity among the team remained irrepressible. Researchers continued to track minute variations, charting patterns and anomalies in private notebooks, often after hours and in isolation. Some began documenting phenomena that challenged conventional understanding: slight but consistent deviations in satellite trajectories, unusual energy spikes in the vacuum of space, and subtle but undeniable regularities that seemed almost communicative in nature. It was as though the signal had a purpose beyond mere existence, an intention, a direction, a message. But what that message might be, or to whom it was directed, remained an unfathomable mystery. As weeks turned into months, the psychological strain of secrecy became evident. Internal logs mentioned sleepless nights, anxiety, and an ever-present sense of being watched, not by agency leadership, but by the signal itself. Some researchers reported feeling as though the signal was reacting to their analysis, subtly altering its pattern when scrutinized. While officially this was dismissed as coincidence, privately, it became the source of intense debate and even fear. The anomaly, confined within the sterile walls of NASA, was beginning to exert an influence over those studying it, shaping their thoughts, observations, and interpretations. By the end of this initial containment period, it was clear to the select team that they were guardians of something monumental, something the wider world was not prepared to confront. The first restrictions, though intended to protect society, had inadvertently created a shadow network of knowledge, a hidden history of discovery and secrecy that would continue to unfold in ways no one could yet predict. The signal, unyielding and inscrutable, had become the silent authority in a struggle for knowledge, secrecy, and ultimately, understanding. As NASA's top-secret team delved deeper into the signal, the nature of the anomaly became increasingly perplexing. Data streams from multiple telescopes, satellites, and probes no longer merely confirmed its existence. They revealed properties that defied all known scientific principles. Initially, researchers had hoped the anomaly could be explained through some rare cosmic event, a pulsar behaving irregularly, or an unusual stellar formation. But these hypotheses quickly collapsed under the weight of accumulating evidence. The signal's spectrum began to show intricate patterns, far beyond the complexity of natural astrophysical phenomena. Mathematicians within the team discovered sequences resembling prime number arrangements, geometric structures, and what appeared to be non-random, algorithmic coding. It was as though the universe itself, or whatever was sending the signal, was attempting to communicate directly with the observers. The implications were staggering. Either an intelligence existed in the depths of space capable of sending structured messages, or the fundamental laws of physics were behaving in ways humanity could not yet comprehend. To study the anomaly more effectively, NASA authorized the design of a specialized mission, a probe equipped with sensors and communication arrays specifically configured to interact with the signal. This initiative, named Project Sentinel, was classified at the highest levels. Its existence was known only to a small circle of engineers, astrophysicists, and mission planners. Every design document, calculation, and simulation was stamped with multiple layers of secrecy. The probe's purpose was clear internally: to reach the region from which the signal emanated, gather unprecedented data, and relay it back to Earth. Externally, however, it was presented as a routine deep space exploration mission. As preparations for Project Sentinel progressed, the research team continued their analysis of the anomalous data. Every new dataset revealed patterns that were increasingly difficult to categorize. Some readings suggested an artificial modulation of electromagnetic waves that altered subtly over time, as if the signal itself were aware of the team's observations and adjusting in response. Others indicated energy fluctuations that violated conservation principles in ways that were, according to several physicists, impossible under current scientific understanding. These observations led to long, heated debates over interpretation. Was the signal a message, a warning, or something beyond comprehension entirely? The secrecy surrounding the project created a tense atmosphere. While some scientists were exhilarated by the prospect of being on the forefront of a potentially historic discovery, others felt trapped, burdened by the ethical dilemma of withholding such profound knowledge from the world. Internal communications reveal growing anxiety over the consequences of failure. One confidential memo read, "The anomaly may not merely be a signal. If it is intelligent, any miscalculation in interpretation could provoke unknown consequences. Extreme caution is advised." Amid these tensions, the anomaly began to exhibit properties that were increasingly disturbing. Variations in signal intensity appeared synchronized with Earth-based events, such as solar storms, geomagnetic shifts, and even minor fluctuations in satellite telemetry unrelated to the anomaly. Analysts could not determine whether these correlations were coincidental or indicative of some form of interaction. The idea that the anomaly might respond to observation, a concept previously relegated to science fiction, became a serious consideration among the team. As the launch date for Project Sentinel approached, internal protocols were tightened further. Access to observational data was restricted to a core group of 10 researchers, and even within that group, sharing of raw data was controlled through secure terminals with monitored activity logs. Engineers reported feeling the weight of this secrecy in every aspect of their work. Calculations were double-checked under scrutiny, simulations run multiple times to ensure compliance with internal standards, and even informal discussions were carefully moderated. The anomalies' presence had transformed the laboratory into a fortress of data, paranoia, and relentless intellectual pursuit. In parallel, the research team discovered anomalies in archived datasets dating back decades. Old recordings from radio telescopes revealed faint signals that bore uncanny similarities to the current anomaly. What had been dismissed at the time as background noise now appeared to be early manifestations of the same phenomenon. This revelation forced the team to confront the possibility that the anomaly was not new. Rather, humanity had simply failed to recognize it for years, perhaps decades. Its persistence, combined with its evolving complexity, suggested a presence in the cosmos that was patient, intelligent, and possibly indifferent to human understanding. The combination of high-stakes secrecy, the anomaly's inexplicable behavior, and the looming launch of Project Sentinel created an atmosphere of unprecedented intensity. Researchers found themselves navigating uncharted scientific territory while simultaneously operating under the weight of absolute discretion. Every decision, every observation, and every calculation carry not just scientific consequences but moral and ethical implications that would challenge the team's understanding of their place in the universe. By the time Project Sentinel lifted off, the anomaly had become more than a signal. It had become an enigma that tested the boundaries of human knowledge, a mystery both profound and unnerving, shaping the trajectory of exploration in ways no one could fully predict. For those involved, the launch was not merely the beginning of a mission, it was the first step into a cosmic enigma that would forever challenge their perception of reality and the hidden depths of space. The launch of Project Sentinel was flawless, or at least it appeared to be. From the observation decks of NASA's Control Center, engineers and scientists watched the probe leave Earth's orbit, its trajectory precisely calculated to intercept the source of the anomalous signal. Cameras tracked its progress, data streams flowed steadily, and for a brief moment, it seemed that the culmination of years of research was finally within reach. Yet, the sense of triumph was fleeting. Within hours of leaving Earth's immediate influence, the probe began transmitting readings that were both extraordinary and inexplicable. Sensors recorded energy fluctuations of a magnitude never before observed in deep space. Instruments designed to measure gravitational anomalies indicated distortions that contradicted Newtonian mechanics. Electromagnetic readings suggested patterns evolving in real time, responding with a subtle precision that hinted at intelligence, or at least purposeful behavior. Scientists monitored the data with a mixture of awe and apprehension, documenting every irregularity while questioning their own ability to interpret it. Then, almost without warning, Project Sentinel's transmissions began to falter. Brief interruptions turned into longer gaps, and soon, the probe vanished from all communication channels. Initially, Mission Control suspected technical failure, a malfunction of the communication array, a misalignment of its antenna, or interference from cosmic radiation. Teams worked tirelessly to re-establish contact, sending repeated signals across multiple frequencies, adjusting parameters, and rerunning diagnostic simulations. Yet the probe remained silent, unresponsive, and entirely untraceable. The disappearance was unprecedented. Previous deep space missions had encountered communication problems, but none had vanished completely within hours of leaving the relative safety of Earth's orbit. Internal discussions became urgent and tense. Analysts reviewed every piece of telemetry, every calculation, and every contingency plan. Some began to speculate privately that the probe's disappearance was related to the anomaly itself, that the signal, once engaged, might possess properties capable of interacting with or even manipulating matter across vast distances. These theories were dismissed in formal reports but lingered in the minds of those closest to the data. The leadership of NASA faced a difficult dilemma. Publicly, the mission was reported as ongoing, with minor communication difficulties attributed to routine signal delays in deep space operations. Internally, however, the probe's status was classified at the highest level. All personnel were instructed to consider the disappearance a temporary setback, a technical anomaly to be resolved without drawing attention. Documents related to the probe's last known coordinates and sensor readings were immediately reclassified, and access was limited to a small group of senior engineers and the original anomaly research team. Despite the enforced secrecy, the research team continued its analysis. What little data was recovered during the final seconds of transmission revealed new and troubling anomalies. The probe's instruments recorded energy signatures that defied physical law, including sudden spatial distortions and rapid shifts in electromagnetic fields. Visual imaging data showed an object, or perhaps a formation, emerging from what should have been empty space, something that could not be categorized, measured, or understood. It was as though the probe had crossed a threshold into a region of space that obeyed entirely different principles. Reports from engineers suggested that the probe's sensors had captured fleeting images resembling structured formations, almost architectural in their complexity, yet clearly not natural. Some described the appearance as geometric constructs suspended in an incomprehensible void, while others referred to it more ominously as an intelligence in form, perhaps observing the observer. These observations, while fragmentary, were enough to send ripples of alarm through the team. The anomaly they had been tracking for years was no longer an abstract signal. It had manifested in ways tangible enough to challenge both human perception and scientific methodology. As the probe remained missing, tensions within NASA escalated. Senior leadership emphasized the need for containment. No reports could leave the agency. No external researchers could be involved, and all records of the probe's trajectory and final transmissions were sealed. The anomaly team, already strained by months of secrecy and observation, faced a new psychological burden: the knowledge that they were witnesses to something beyond comprehension, something potentially capable of influencing both matter and information at cosmic distances. Amid the confusion, a small number of researchers began to speculate on worst-case scenarios. If the probe had not simply malfunctioned but been drawn into, or absorbed by, the anomaly, then the phenomenon could be far more dynamic and sentient than previously imagined. Internal notes hinted at an unsettling possibility. The anomaly might actively engage with objects entering its influence, altering or even neutralizing them. While these discussions were not officially documented, they circulated quietly among the senior members of the team, contributing to a climate of apprehension and unspoken fear. In the weeks following the disappearance, the probe's silence remained absolute. Attempts to redirect other satellites to the same coordinates yielded only empty space, void of detectable signals. Meanwhile, the anomaly persisted, continuing to broadcast patterns of electromagnetic and gravitational irregularities that the team could observe but could not interact with directly. The very event that had been intended as a controlled experiment, the launch of Project Sentinel, had become a confrontation with an unknown presence, one that challenged not only the limits of human technology but the boundaries of understanding itself. For those tasked with observing the anomaly, the probe's vanishing was a stark reminder of the delicate balance between discovery and danger. Every measurement, every analysis, every carefully calculated maneuver now carried the weight of existential uncertainty. The silent void that had always seemed distant and impersonal now felt immediate, intelligent, and, in ways that could not be articulated, deeply aware. NASA's mission, originally designed to expand knowledge, had unwittingly become a journey into an enigma with consequences far beyond the expectations of any human mind. The vanishing probe marked a turning point. The anomaly was no longer a distant signal to be decoded. It was an active force, capable of interacting with human technology and possibly human perception itself. From that moment onward, every subsequent decision, every secret directive, and every classified mission would be shaped by the knowledge that something in the cosmos was not only observing humanity, but responding to it. In the aftermath of Project Sentinel's disappearance, the NASA anomaly team shifted focus to what they could observe from orbiting satellites and telescopes still under their control. What they found would soon test the boundaries of both scientific understanding and institutional secrecy. Hidden within the data, buried under layers of routine cosmic observations, were images that defied explanation, structures and patterns that should not exist according to any known laws of nature. These images were first identified during a routine cross-analysis of archival data from multiple space observatories. At first glance, they appeared to be ordinary cosmic formations, asteroid fields, distant star clusters, or nebulae. But closer examination revealed anomalies so precise and intricate that they seemed deliberate, almost artificial. Straight lines intersecting at impossible angles, geometric shapes suspended in regions of space where no matter should logically hold form, and symmetrical patterns repeated across thousands of light years. It was as if the cosmos itself had been edited, sculpted with intent. The discovery of these images sent a wave of alarm through the inner circle of researchers. While publicly, NASA maintained that all captured data were routine, internally the team understood that they were observing phenomena that challenged decades of astrophysical theory. More troubling, certain objects within the images appeared to shift slightly between captures. Structures that should have remained stationary in the vacuum of space were subtly moving. Their positions and orientations altered in ways that suggested they were not inert. The team began referring to these objects privately as dynamic anomalies. Access to these images was strictly controlled. Leadership feared that even partial disclosure could provoke public panic or inspire misinformation. Digital copies were encrypted and stored on isolated servers, with access logs constantly monitored. Analysts were reminded repeatedly that these observations were classified, and that no detail could leave the secured network without express authorization. Internal memos emphasized, "The public is not prepared to understand what you are seeing. For now, observation must remain internal." Despite the restrictions, curiosity among researchers was relentless. Over weeks of painstaking study, they began to notice patterns that suggested intelligence, or at least some form of non-random design. Certain formations mirrored concepts familiar to human cognition, lattices resembling crystalline structures, arrangements evocative of symbolic representations, and recurring motifs that appeared across vast distances. Statistical analyses indicated that the likelihood of these structures forming naturally was virtually zero. Whispers began circulating within the team. Were these remnants of an alien civilization, natural structures imbued with inexplicable order, or something else entirely? The images also revealed spatial anomalies that made ordinary physics seem irrelevant. Light within certain regions bent at unusual angles, gravitational readings suggested concentrated masses where none should exist, and electromagnetic signatures fluctuated in ways that seemed to respond to observation. Engineers tested and recalibrated their instruments repeatedly, convinced that technical error must explain the discrepancies. But every test confirmed the image's authenticity. What they were seeing was real and forbidden. In one particularly unsettling set of images, a formation resembling a vast lattice of interconnected nodes stretched across hundreds of kilometers, suspended in the vacuum of a distant asteroid belt. Initial calculations indicated that such a structure could not maintain stability under known material laws. Energy readings from the same region were anomalous, suggesting active processes at work. Some researchers privately theorized that these structures were not stationary constructs, but mechanisms, functional systems operating on scales that defied human comprehension. The implications were staggering. If these images represented active, functioning objects, then humanity was witnessing technology, or phenomena, far beyond its own capabilities. The secrecy surrounding these findings created tension within the team. Some scientists argued that the images should be studied openly, that understanding these anomalies could advance human knowledge immeasurably. Others feared that disclosure could provoke geopolitical or societal consequences beyond control. Internal discussions were punctuated with warnings. The anomalies might not be passive. The very act of observation could trigger unknown effects. A sense of unease permeated the research labs, as though the cosmos itself had become a stage for events beyond human oversight. The forbidden images also hinted at connections to the vanished Project Sentinel probe. Certain anomalies appeared aligned with the probe's last known trajectory, as if the anomaly had shifted in anticipation of human interaction. Analysts compared timing, positions, and energy readings, discovering correlations that were statistically impossible. The conclusion was unavoidable. Whatever they were observing was aware of human actions, responsive to them in ways that suggested intelligence, strategy, or manipulation. This realization deepened the team's sense of isolation, the knowledge that they were witnessing phenomena not only beyond comprehension but also beyond control. Internal memos began to reference a growing concern. These forbidden images were not merely scientific curiosities, but a warning. Notes described the images as messages without language, indications of a presence or mechanism that could not be engaged directly without consequence. The anomaly had transcended simple observation. It was now an active, interactive factor, shaping the very data being collected. The research team faced an unprecedented challenge: to study and document without provoking, to understand without exposure, and to navigate the terrifying possibility that the cosmos itself might be conscious, or at least purposeful, in ways humanity had never imagined. By the end of this chapter of discovery, the forbidden images had cemented themselves as a turning point. They were no longer mere data points. They were the evidence of a hidden dimension of the universe, one deliberately obscured and beyond conventional human interaction. And as the team continued their work in secret, a quiet, almost imperceptible fear began to take hold. They were not only observers of the unknown, they were participants, inadvertently engaged in a cosmic game they did not yet understand. In the weeks following the discovery of the forbidden images, NASA's focus shifted from passive observation to direct engagement. The anomaly had proven itself both persistent and adaptive, defying all previous assumptions about the limitations of space, physics, and human technology. While the public remained unaware, a series of covert missions was quietly proposed, planned, and executed. Missions that would never appear in official records, missions that existed only within the sealed corridors of classified programs. The first of these operations was designated Project Veil. Its purpose was both simple and unprecedented: to send probes and sensors into regions of space identified through the forbidden images, to gather data beyond the reach of conventional observation. Each mission was engineered under the strictest secrecy. Engineers worked in isolated laboratories, shielded from casual inquiry, and all digital records were encrypted and compartmentalized. Only a select few knew the full scope of the operations. The rest of NASA operated under the impression that these missions were routine calibration tests or deep space survey initiatives, masking the truth behind layers of bureaucratic misdirection. Project Veil's first probe, launched months after the Sentinel disappearance, was equipped with advanced imaging technology, gravitational sensors, and autonomous navigation systems designed to survive environments that would destroy conventional equipment. Internal simulations accounted for scenarios that had no precedent: gravitational anomalies, temporal distortions, and interactions with unknown forms of energy. Every precaution reflected the lessons learned from the vanished Sentinel probe. Yet, even as the team prepared, a quiet anxiety hung over every phase of the operation. No one could predict how the anomaly, or whatever entity or mechanism existed within it, would respond. The probe's early transmissions were encouraging. Initial scans confirmed the presence of the anomalous structures first observed in the forbidden images. Nodes of impossible geometry, lattices spanning hundreds of kilometers, and regions of space where light and matter seemed to behave in contradictory ways were all documented. Analysts celebrated these findings internally, though their enthusiasm was tempered by the knowledge that the probe's exposure to the anomaly could provoke consequences beyond comprehension. Already, subtle irregularities in the probe's trajectory suggested that it was interacting with the phenomenon in ways that human science could not yet describe. The successes of Project Veil, however, were tempered by incidents that heightened tension. Probes occasionally reported sudden energy spikes, communications interference, or inexplicable spatial distortions. In one instance, a probe transmitted images of what appeared to be massive structures shifting position over hours, as though responding to its presence. Engineers and scientists debated the nature of these movements. Were they natural? Were they mechanisms? Or, most unsettlingly, Were they deliberate reactions from an intelligent force? The team's confidential memos reflected the growing concern. We are observers and participants simultaneously. Caution must override curiosity. Parallel to Project Veil, NASA quietly initiated Project Lantern, a mission aimed not at observation but at interaction. Small autonomous drones were deployed to regions adjacent to the anomalous structures, designed to emit controlled signals in an attempt to provoke a measurable response. These missions were controversial even among the secrecy-bound team. Some argued that provoking the anomaly could yield invaluable data. Others feared it could trigger unforeseen consequences. High-level briefings stressed the need for control. All transmissions were to be encoded, minimal, and reversible. Any deviation could, according to internal projections, result in catastrophic or irreversible changes to the probe or its environment. Data from these hidden missions began to reveal patterns suggesting that the anomaly was aware of human attempts to measure and engage it. Structures shifted subtly, energy readings adapted dynamically, and electromagnetic signatures fluctuated in response to the drone's signals. Analysts noted with unease that the phenomenon appeared not only intelligent but anticipatory, responding in ways that suggested it had been observing human technology long before the launch of Sentinel. Some speculated that the anomaly might possess an ability to perceive intent or calculate probabilities with a precision far beyond human capability. As Project Veil and Project Lantern continued, a new set of observations emerged, phenomena that were simultaneously terrifying and fascinating. Some regions of space exhibited distortions in time perception. Readings suggested that seconds measured on board the probes did not match clocks on Earth. Gravitational sensors indicated forces shifting without visible sources, and visual imaging captured what appeared to be ephemeral structures, present for brief moments before dissolving into the void. Internally, researchers began referring to these zones as immutable spaces, areas where reality itself seemed to bend in response to unknown rules. Despite the growing wealth of data, the missions were marked by frustration. The anomaly remained elusive, adaptive, and resistant to direct measurement. Every advancement seemed to be met with a counter-response, and every success in observation revealed further layers of complexity. The research team documented everything meticulously, aware that the accumulated knowledge represented perhaps the most significant discoveries in human history, yet it remained inaccessible to the world. These hidden missions were not only scientific experiments, they were a tightrope walk between understanding and intrusion, each action carrying risk both to technology and to those observing it. The combination of secrecy, complexity, and unexplained interactions began to weigh heavily on the team. Psychologists embedded within NASA noted rising levels of stress, insomnia, and obsession among the researchers. Field engineers reported a sense of being watched, as though the anomaly's awareness extended beyond the probes into the minds of those studying it. While these experiences were dismissed in formal reports as natural psychological effects of high-stress research, internally they were recognized as a pattern. The phenomenon seemed capable of influencing human perception, subtly guiding attention and shaping cognition in ways that were difficult to quantify. By the conclusion of this phase, the hidden missions had transformed the anomaly from a distant signal into a tangible, interactive presence. It was no longer merely an object of observation. It had become a participant in the unfolding narrative, challenging human assumptions, technology, and understanding. Every probe, every drone, every sensor became a messenger, carrying both discovery and warning, navigating the fine line between revelation and catastrophe. The team had entered uncharted territory, a domain where curiosity, secrecy, and the unknown collided in a delicate balance that would define the course of exploration and human comprehension far beyond Earth. By the time NASA's hidden missions, Project Veil and Project Lantern, had been underway for several months, the anomaly had evolved from a distant curiosity into a formidable enigma. The probes sent to observe and interact with the phenomenon began returning data that was increasingly complex, disturbing, and undeniably intelligent. Analysts, once confident in their ability to classify and interpret cosmic phenomena, found themselves confronting an entity or mechanism whose behavior defied every law of physics known to humankind. The first tangible signs of intelligence were subtle. Probes recorded movements of anomalous structures that seemed to anticipate the probe's trajectory. Lattices shifted slightly, nodes realigned, and energy signatures fluctuated in ways that mirrored the probe's adjustments. Engineers and scientists debated in hushed tones whether these responses were natural or deliberate. One internal report, later leaked to a small circle of trusted colleagues, described it as, "The structures are not passive. They respond with precision, almost as if aware of the observer's intentions." Visual data presented the most unsettling encounters. High-resolution images captured geometric formations that seemed to rotate or reposition themselves during observation. In some cases, these formations appeared to interact with the probe's sensors, producing signals that could not be explained by conventional physics. Patterns emerged in the electromagnetic spectrum that resembled modulation, akin to a message encoded in the very fabric of space. Yet, attempts to decode these signals yielded nothing definitive, only more questions, amplifying the sense of a presence both deliberate and incomprehensible. As these anomalies unfolded, internal tension within NASA intensified. The leadership maintained strict secrecy, fearing that any public disclosure could provoke widespread panic or inspire speculation beyond control. Analysts were forbidden from discussing findings even within the broader scientific community. Communication with external collaborators was curtailed, and archival records were classified retroactively to obscure patterns noticed in historical data. In effect, the anomaly had created a hidden ecosystem of knowledge, accessible only to a select few, insulated from scrutiny, and carefully monitored to prevent leaks. Despite the enforced secrecy, some information began to seep out. Small anomalies, minor reports, and unofficial notes were shared among a network of scientists and engineers who had previously worked on other deep space projects. These early leaks, though fragmented and heavily redacted, hinted at a profound reality. Humanity was observing structures that were not merely natural, but seemingly intentional. Within the agency, this was treated as both an opportunity and a threat, a duality that would define all subsequent missions and analyses. Psychological effects on the researchers were increasingly documented. Some reported vivid dreams of the formations observed in space, others described a persistent feeling of being watched, and several noted that the anomaly seemed to influence their perception of routine data. One internal memo read, "The anomaly does not merely exist, it communicates through patterns we barely perceive. Observation itself is an interaction." While formal channels dismissed these reports as anecdotal or psychosomatic, privately they were taken seriously, guiding both analytical methods and mission planning. Amid these encounters, a crucial breakthrough occurred. A probe transmitting near one of the most complex structures recorded rapid sequences of energy pulses that, when analyzed, displayed a repeating rhythmic pattern. Mathematicians on the team immediately recognized elements resembling prime number sequences, fractal geometry, and self-similar patterns across multiple scales. This suggested intentionality, perhaps a form of communication, but to what end remained unknowable. Efforts to respond with controlled signals were initiated, forming the first tentative attempt at interaction. Initial feedback from the anomaly was subtle, manifesting as minute fluctuations in energy fields near the probe, but sufficient to confirm that the anomaly was responsive. As these interactions became routine, the potential for misunderstanding, or catastrophe, grew. The leadership's insistence on secrecy further magnified these tensions. While internal factions debated methodology and ethics, the outer world remained unaware of the anomaly's existence. The team operated in isolation, knowing that any misstep could compromise not only their careers but the integrity of the entire program. This pressure forged a complex dynamic. Collaboration was necessary for survival, but competition and ideological differences threatened to unravel progress. Trust became both a currency and a liability, as researchers weighed the risks of sharing insights against the consequences of miscommunication. Despite the conflicts, progress continued. The anomaly persisted in revealing increasingly complex patterns, moving in ways that challenged both understanding and instrumentation. Every observation, however, carried the weight of consequence. Internal conflicts reminded the team that they were navigating unknown forces without precedent, and that each decision could have repercussions beyond calculation. The hidden missions, already operating at the edge of technological and cognitive capacity, now had to contend with the fragility of human collaboration itself. By the conclusion of this chapter, the anomaly program had transformed into a delicate balance of knowledge, secrecy, and internal tension. The universe outside continued its silent, intelligent operations, while the team within NASA struggled to reconcile ambition, caution, ethics, and authority. Internal conflicts, once manageable, had become an invisible force as powerful as the anomaly itself, shaping decisions, interactions, and the very trajectory of human exploration. The stakes had never been higher, and the cost of error, whether technical, ethical, or psychological, was now inseparable from the pursuit of discovery. As NASA's hidden missions continued, new data revealed regions of space that defied all prior mapping and understanding. Analysts within the anomaly program began referring to these areas as restricted zones, vast expanses where conventional physical laws appeared inconsistent, where light bent unnaturally, gravity fluctuated without apparent source, and structures materialized only to dissolve moments later. These zones were not visible on standard star charts, nor were they marked by any conventional astronomical survey. For those studying the anomaly, the restricted zones became both a point of obsession and a source of fear. The first indications of a restricted zone came from anomalies in Project Veil's sensor readings. Probes approaching coordinates derived from the forbidden images experienced sudden deviations in trajectory, unexpected power fluctuations, and most alarmingly, brief interruptions in data streams accompanied by transient patterns in the electromagnetic field. Engineers initially assumed equipment failure, but cross-analysis of independent probes confirmed the presence of consistent phenomena. It was clear that the zones were not an artifact of instrumentation. They were real, measurable, and dangerous. Restricted zones displayed behavior that was almost interactive. In one instance, a probe approaching a particular lattice structure within a zone experienced immediate energy fluctuations, forcing an automatic course correction. Moments later, the structure shifted, as though avoiding the probe or responding to its presence. Analysts noted that repeated passes by different probes produced subtly different responses, suggesting that the zones were capable of adaptive interaction. For the first time, the anomaly's intelligence, previously inferred, manifested as observable behavior affecting physical objects. The internal response to these discoveries was immediate and stringent. Project directives prohibited further unsupervised missions into restricted zones, and access to coordinates was limited to a small cadre of senior scientists and engineers. Security protocols were intensified, and all data related to the zones was encrypted and compartmentalized. Leadership emphasized the dual nature of these areas, scientifically invaluable, yet potentially catastrophic if mismanaged. Any misstep could compromise equipment, risk lives, or, in worst-case scenarios, provoke unknown reactions from the anomaly itself. Psychological impact on the team became increasingly evident. Analysts and engineers working with the restricted zones reported heightened stress, an almost visceral sense of unease, and persistent thoughts of observation beyond human perception. Some described the zones as having a presence, not merely in space but in consciousness, a subtle awareness that seemed to respond to attention and intent. Internal notes recorded experiences of visual echoes, where structures or shapes would appear in peripheral vision, only to vanish upon direct observation. While officially documented as anecdotal, these accounts influenced operational decisions, emphasizing caution over aggressive exploration. Despite the danger, the restricted zones offered tantalizing scientific rewards. Within the mutable regions, energy patterns suggested phenomena akin to artificial constructs, lattices and formations of improbable geometry, regions of concentrated energy behaving as if directed, and transient objects exhibiting motion that implied awareness. Computational models indicated that these formations could not exist under standard physical principles, challenging every assumption about material strength, gravity, and electromagnetic behavior. Some researchers speculated privately that the zones contained remnants of advanced technology, perhaps engineered by an intelligence vastly more sophisticated than humanity. Project Lantern, now operating in tandem with Veil, attempted limited interaction with the zones using autonomous drones. Signals were sent, measurements taken, and responses recorded. Early results were startling. The zones reacted differently depending on signal type, strength, and duration, suggesting selective perception. Some drones reported near-instantaneous changes in spatial orientation, as though the fabric of the zone itself was adjusting. Energy readings suggested amplification and reflection phenomena that had no terrestrial analog. Analysts began to theorize that the anomaly was not simply present but had effectively turned regions of space into active, responsive environments. Confidential internal memos highlighted a growing realization: the restricted zones were not passive locations but domains controlled, or at least influenced, by the anomaly. One memo read, "Every observation alters the zone. Every signal provokes a reaction. We are not merely observers. We are participants in an evolving system whose rules we do not yet understand." The implication was clear: attempts to study these areas without understanding the underlying mechanisms could yield unpredictable and possibly catastrophic results. Political and bureaucratic pressures compounded the challenges. NASA leadership, aware of the anomaly's growing complexity, pressured the research team to maintain control and ensure no information leaked. International collaborations were curtailed, and even internal reporting was subject to strict auditing. The team's dual responsibility, to study the anomaly while containing knowledge, created conflicts of interest, ethical dilemmas, and interpersonal tension. Some scientists advocated extreme caution, while others pressed for bold engagement, believing that the restricted zones represented humanity's first opportunity to interact directly with a cosmic intelligence. By the end of this phase, restricted zones had become central to the anomaly program's objectives, representing both the pinnacle of discovery and the height of risk. They were places where observation alone carried consequence, where every action could provoke a response, and where the rules of space, physics, and understanding seemed mutable. The zones were both a temptation and a warning, embodying the paradox of human curiosity. The closer we reach toward understanding the cosmos, the more it pushes back, reminding us that there are forces beyond comprehension and regions deliberately hidden from ordinary perception. The months of observation, probing, and tentative interaction with the restricted zones culminated in a moment that NASA's anomaly team would later describe as unprecedented. What had begun as careful, secretive exploration escalated into tangible consequences, both for the missions and for the humans behind them. The anomaly, once an abstract signal and distant formations, had transformed into a force capable of responding to human action and exacting consequences for missteps. The first signs were subtle. Probes operating near the mutable structures began reporting unusual anomalies in their onboard systems. Navigation arrays misaligned, sensors overloaded with energy readings, and communication modules briefly losing synchronization with Earth-based control. At first, these events were attributed to technical glitches, cosmic radiation, or interference from other celestial phenomena. But repeated occurrences, precisely correlated with human-initiated signals or adjustments, made it clear that these were neither random nor coincidental. Then came the more alarming events. During one Project Lantern mission, a drone transmitting a pattern signal designed to test the anomaly's responsiveness suddenly ceased all transmissions. Moments later, telemetry indicated a complete restructuring of local gravitational fields around the probe. The autonomous navigation system reported forces that could not exist under known physics, threatening to crush the drone's frame. Engineers attempted to recalibrate in real time, but the probe's movements were no longer controllable. Internal logs recorded the chilling realization: the anomaly, not cosmic interference, was influencing the probe, reshaping space itself to react to its presence. Simultaneously, human operators began experiencing unexpected psychological effects. Analysts reviewing live feeds reported disorientation, intense vertigo, and a persistent feeling of being observed, even when physically isolated. Some described fleeting visual hallucinations of structures or patterns from the zones, appearing in peripheral vision or in dreams immediately after work shifts. One internal memo, marked confidential, noted, The anomaly appears to affect cognition directly, subtly altering perception and emotional response. Observation is no longer passive. While these reports were initially questioned as psychosomatic, the consistency across multiple team members could not be ignored. The anomaly's influence extended beyond immediate observation. Data collected from probes in restricted zones revealed that energy fluctuations and structural shifts often anticipated human actions. Attempts to decode patterns or respond with controlled signals were met with adaptive responses, suggesting not merely awareness but strategic interaction. Analysts began to describe the phenomenon as a participant rather than an object, capable of monitoring, interpreting, and reacting to human input with a precision that surpassed any artificial intelligence known to the agency. The first breaches of operational safety occurred quietly but with dramatic impact. Several probes experienced hardware failures after entering specific subregions of the restricted zones, despite prior modeling predicting safe conditions. While these losses were officially attributed to environmental hazards or mechanical error, internal reviews highlighted a correlation. The anomaly actively engaged with human instruments, effectively asserting control over interactions in its domain. Engineers quickly realized that these events were not anomalies. They were responses, deliberate consequences of human intrusion. At the same time, fragments of information began leaking outside the program, unintentionally or through minor procedural lapses. Independent observatories detected faint signals corresponding to those reported in classified mission data. Analysts outside NASA began speculating about unusual patterns, distant structures, and strange energy spikes. Though incomplete and fragmentary, these leaks demonstrated that the anomaly's presence could not be entirely contained. Even within a controlled environment, human observation and the anomaly's responses were entwined, generating a complex feedback loop with unpredictable results. The internal consequences were equally profound. Conflicts among team members intensified as the stakes became clearer. Aggressive exploration could provoke the anomaly further, yet hesitation risked missing critical discoveries. Leadership emphasized containment and discipline, but the growing number of observed consequences, from drone failures to cognitive disturbances, highlighted the insufficiency of procedural safeguards. The anomaly was no longer a distant signal. It was an active, dynamic force shaping human perception, technology, and understanding. Ethical and philosophical questions began to dominate internal discussions. Was humanity justified in interacting with forces it could not comprehend? Did the anomaly possess consciousness, intelligence, or intent? And if so, what moral obligations did observers have? Internal memos revealed deep division. Some argued for retreat and observation-only protocols, while others insisted that engagement, careful, calculated, and courageous, was the only path to knowledge. The consequences of interaction, they realized, were not limited to equipment or data. They extended to the human mind, perception, and possibly even global awareness. By the end of this period, the anomaly had redefined the rules of engagement in space exploration. Restricted zones were no longer theoretical curiosities. They were active domains where human actions elicited measurable and sometimes dangerous responses. Observation, communication, and interaction were no longer passive endeavors but a negotiation with an entity, or entities, that could manipulate energy, structure, and perception itself. NASA's anomaly program had entered a realm where the consequences of discovery extended beyond science, technology, and secrecy, touching the very limits of human understanding. The chapter closed with a sobering recognition: every future mission, every analysis, and every probe would carry the weight of precedent. The anomaly had demonstrated that curiosity was no longer without cost, and that even in controlled environments, human ambition and observation could provoke responses with unpredictable, and potentially irreversible, consequences. In this new reality, knowledge came at a price, and the universe had made clear that it would exact that price with precision. By the time the anomaly program entered its 11th phase, the consequences of interaction with the restricted zones had escalated from subtle disturbances to clear, tangible threats. NASA's top-secret team faced not only the mystery of the phenomenon itself but also the growing internal and operational crises that threatened the viability of the missions and, potentially, the safety of human personnel. The universe, once an observer, now seemed poised to act. Reports from Project Veil and Project Lantern indicated that structures within the zones were moving with greater frequency and complexity, often in ways that appeared directly responsive to probe activity. Nodes would shift, lattices would realign, and energy spikes increased in intensity, overwhelming instruments and sometimes damaging the probes entirely. Engineers documented multiple cases in which probes lost structural integrity in regions previously deemed safe. Analysis suggested the anomaly had adapted to prior strategies, demonstrating an intelligence capable of anticipating human decisions. It was no longer an unknown signal, it was a calculating presence. As these anomalies increased, internal conflict intensified. Factions within the research team debated the appropriate response: aggressive engagement to decode the anomaly's patterns, or strict containment to avoid provocation. Tensions spilled over into every decision: which probes could be launched, how signals should be transmitted, and whether to risk further exploration of the most volatile zones. Meetings became confrontational, as the team struggled to reconcile scientific ambition with the ethical responsibility of potentially provoking an unknown intelligence. The threat was not only scientific but operational. Communication disruptions became more severe, sometimes affecting Earth-based instruments, as well as the probes themselves. Data packets returned corrupted or delayed, sensors reported impossible fluctuations in gravity, and autonomous drones exhibited behavior inconsistent with programming. One report described a probe briefly appearing to vanish from multiple tracking systems before re-emerging at an offset location with altered readings. Engineers, stunned, struggled to rationalize these events. Internal notes suggested the anomaly was now actively manipulating physical space, not merely responding to observation. Psychological stress among the team also intensified. Analysts reported persistent feelings of being watched, heightened anxiety, and vivid dreams of structures from the restricted zones. Some experienced what were described internally as cognitive echoes, fleeting visions of formations or signals while away from work. Psychologists quietly embedded within the team noted an unprecedented pattern. Exposure to the anomaly appeared to influence perception, emotional stability, and decision-making. Researchers were aware that these experiences might be partly psychosomatic, yet the consistency across personnel suggested a more profound effect. The anomaly's intelligence appeared to extend beyond the probes, influencing interactions indirectly. Patterns in energy readings suggested that attempts to deceive or mislead the anomaly, through false signals or modified trajectories, were being countered with corresponding adaptations. Analysts privately speculated that the phenomenon was capable of predictive analysis, simulating possible human actions and responding with precision. This realization created a chilling sense of vulnerability. Humans were no longer controlling the engagement, the anomaly dictated terms. In parallel, restricted external data leaks intensified the sense of exposure. Independent observatories detected anomalous signals correlating with the restricted zones, and whispers of unusual structures began circulating in niche scientific forums. While publicly dismissed as artifacts or measurement error, internally these leaks confirmed that containment was increasingly fragile. The anomaly's reach appeared to extend beyond the intended domain, a reminder that observation alone might provoke unintended consequences on a larger scale. The growing threat forced NASA leadership to institute emergency protocols. Access to the zones was further limited. Autonomous drones were equipped with fail-safes and self-destruct measures, and all communications were encrypted with enhanced security protocols. Contingency plans for probe loss, equipment failure, and personnel safety were revised daily. Even with these precautions, the anomaly's unpredictability ensured that no measure could fully guarantee control. Amid this tension, small but alarming anomalies began appearing in adjacent regions of space. These areas, previously considered stable, now displayed faint but detectable shifts in energy and gravitational fields, coinciding with probe activity in the restricted zones. Analysts realized that the anomaly's influence extended beyond its immediate domain, suggesting that its interactions were not contained. Every action, every signal, and every observation had the potential to ripple outward, producing consequences that were impossible to predict or fully understand. By the end of this phase, the team understood that the anomaly represented a dual challenge, a profound opportunity for discovery and a rising threat that could not be ignored. The universe was no longer passive, it had become an active participant, capable of shaping human technology, cognition, and understanding. The restricted zones were no longer simply places of observation. They were proving grounds where every choice carried risk, and where the line between exploration and endangerment had blurred entirely. Internal reports concluded with a stark warning: humanity's engagement with the anomaly must proceed with extreme caution, yet the curiosity driving the program could not be entirely suppressed. The stakes had escalated beyond equipment and data. They now encompassed human perception, ethics, and survival. NASA's anomaly program stood at the precipice, aware that the next phase of interaction could yield discovery, disaster, or both. By the time the anomaly program entered its 12th phase, the consequences of human interaction had begun to manifest in ways that could no longer be contained. The carefully maintained secrecy that had protected the missions, the team, and the public was under threat. The anomaly, once a distant enigma, had transformed into a dynamic and unpredictable force that interacted not only with probes but indirectly with humans and the broader universe. The consequences of observation and engagement had begun to reveal themselves, and they were profound. The first signs were technological. Probes and drones operating in restricted zones began to fail at unprecedented rates. Systems that had previously withstood energy spikes, gravitational distortions, and electromagnetic interference now suffered complete shutdowns within seconds of entering certain subregions. Internal logs documented anomalies in telemetry. Probes reported positions offset by hundreds of kilometers, data streams fragmented or scrambled, and instruments registering energies beyond design limits. Engineers concluded that the anomaly was actively adapting to the probes, neutralizing or restructuring them in real time. Even more alarming were the indirect effects observed on Earth. Laboratories within NASA reported electronic disturbances, including power fluctuations, signal corruption, and anomalous readings on unrelated instruments. Analysts began to hypothesize that the anomaly's influence extended beyond the immediate zones of space, interacting subtly with electromagnetic fields and technological systems across thousands of kilometers. These observations prompted emergency protocols, including temporary shutdowns of non-essential systems, yet even these measures could not fully insulate the team from the anomaly's reach. Psychological effects on personnel intensified alongside technological disturbances. Researchers reported heightened anxiety, vivid hallucinations, and intrusive thoughts directly related to the structures and patterns within the restricted zones. One internal report described a cascade effect, in which exposure to anomaly data seemed to amplify perceptual and cognitive distortions among those repeatedly analyzing the signals. Even senior scientists, previously considered immune to stress effects, admitted to disorientation and difficulty distinguishing between observation and interpretation. Some described seeing fleeting images of structures or patterns in everyday surroundings, or hearing rhythmic pulses echoing the signals in dreams and waking moments alike. The ethical and operational consequences were equally pressing. Discussions about the morality of continued engagement became urgent and contentious. Some team members argued that the missions had already exceeded safe bounds. Humanity was engaging with forces it could not understand, risking both personnel and potentially global consequences. Others maintained that retreat would squander the opportunity to witness phenomena beyond imagination. Internal communications reflected the tension. We are observers and participants simultaneously, and every action has ripples we cannot measure. Withdrawal risks knowledge, engagement risks everything else. Unintended leaks of information further complicated the situation. Small fragments of data, previously thought secure, began appearing in public channels or in the analysis of independent observatories. Although incomplete and heavily redacted, these leaks revealed patterns, structures, and energy readings that suggested extraordinary phenomena were occurring far beyond human comprehension. Media speculation and informal scientific forums began discussing unexplained cosmic anomalies, strange signals, and unverified structures. Internally, these leaks were treated as emergencies, containment protocols were tightened, access to data restricted further, and personnel were reminded of the absolute necessity of secrecy. Simultaneously, the anomalies' direct responses escalated. Some probes reported structural shifts of formations so rapid and extensive that prior models of physics could not account for them. In one case, a drone disappeared entirely from both visual and sensor tracking before reappearing in an offset location, with instruments indicating massive energy influxes. Engineers noted that conventional explanations, magnetic fields, gravitational anomalies, or sensor error, were insufficient. The phenomenon had effectively asserted control over its environment, manipulating space, energy, and matter in ways that suggested deliberate action. The anomaly's intelligence became increasingly evident. Energy pulses, structural shifts, and gravitational distortions consistently correlated with human action, whether probe movement, signal transmission, or observational patterns. Analysts concluded that the phenomenon was actively monitoring attempts at interaction, adapting its response with speed and precision far beyond human capacity. The term, adaptive intelligence, began appearing in confidential internal reports, emphasizing that the anomaly was not passive, not random, and not simply natural. It was a force with awareness and agency. By the end of this phase, it was clear that the anomaly had fundamentally altered the rules of engagement in space exploration. Restricted zones were no longer simply areas of interest. They were active, responsive, and potentially dangerous environments. Human interaction had provoked a cascade of consequences: technological failures, psychological stress, and partial data leaks, each amplifying the complexity and risk of continued observation. Internal memos warned of a sobering reality. The anomaly's reach was growing, its intelligence adaptive, and the consequences of miscalculation escalating. NASA's anomaly team faced a delicate and unprecedented challenge: to continue exploration while managing risks that were neither fully predictable nor controllable. Every probe, every signal, and every observation had the potential to trigger effects both intended and unforeseen, while human perception itself became a medium of interaction with a force that remained, in every measurable way, beyond comprehension. By the 13th phase of the anomaly program, the situation within NASA had reached a critical threshold. The combination of technological failures, psychological strain, and partial information leaks created a crisis that threatened both the missions and the integrity of the agency itself. The anomaly, once a distant enigma, had evolved into a persistent and interactive force, demonstrating an intelligence that could manipulate not only probes and instruments but human perception and decision-making. The crisis began subtly. Initially, minor disagreements among team members escalated into conflicts over methodology and protocol. Factions formed, one advocating aggressive engagement with the restricted zones, arguing that further study could unlock knowledge beyond imagination, and another urging caution, warning that continued interaction risked provoking consequences beyond human control. These ideological divisions intensified stress and eroded trust, making collaboration increasingly difficult. Meetings, once orderly, devolved into heated debates over risk, ethics, and the morality of observation itself. Compounding internal conflict were repeated technological failures. Probes sent into the mutable zones often returned corrupted or incomplete data, and some vanished entirely. Systems designed to withstand extreme gravitational, electromagnetic, and energy distortions were overwhelmed, forcing engineers to reassess every assumption about the anomaly. One internal report noted, "We are no longer in control of the environment. Every intervention appears to provoke adaptive responses. The anomaly is not passive, it is actively engaging with human technology." Psychological effects on personnel intensified alongside operational failures. Analysts reported vivid hallucinations, intrusive thoughts, and persistent feelings of being watched, both within the labs and outside of work hours. Several team members documented experiences of seeing fleeting geometric structures, hearing rhythmic pulses matching anomalous signals, and feeling involuntary emotional responses to patterns within the restricted zones. Psychologists embedded in the program observed an unprecedented phenomenon. Prolonged exposure to the anomalies signals was directly influencing cognition, memory, and perception. Some researchers struggled to distinguish between objective observation and subjective experience. The situation escalated further when internal data leaks began attracting external attention. Independent observatories and private astronomers detected unusual energy signatures and structural anomalies consistent with those described in confidential NASA reports. Although the data was fragmentary, it sparked speculation about unidentified cosmic phenomena and potential intelligent structures beyond Earth. The leaks, accidental or otherwise, intensified the agency's sense of vulnerability, leading to heightened security protocols, restricted access to data, and increased monitoring of personnel. The anomaly's presence was no longer contained, either physically or informationally. Leadership within NASA responded with emergency measures. A special crisis task force was assembled, tasked with stabilizing the missions, managing personnel stress, and containing sensitive information. Internal memos emphasized strict adherence to protocol, careful monitoring of anomaly interactions, and documentation of every incident. Despite these efforts, the team struggled to regain control. Every action seemed to trigger adaptive responses from the anomaly, reinforcing the sense that humanity was no longer observing passively but was being observed and influenced in return. Operational failures and psychological strain converged in a particularly alarming incident. A probe operating near a highly active subregion of a restricted zone disappeared from all tracking systems for several minutes before reappearing with corrupted data and a displaced trajectory. Simultaneously, several analysts reported intense visual and auditory phenomena resembling structures and pulses from the anomaly, causing confusion, disorientation, and panic. Internal communications described the event as a cognitive cascade, illustrating the anomaly's capacity to influence both instruments and human perception simultaneously. The crisis also highlighted profound ethical dilemmas. Some team members questioned whether continued engagement with the anomaly was morally defensible, given the potential risks to personnel, technology, and possibly the broader planet. Others argued that withdrawal would forfeit humanity's opportunity to witness phenomena of unparalleled significance. These debates intensified existing internal conflicts, creating a climate of tension, fear, and uncertainty. By the conclusion of this phase, the anomaly program had entered a state of heightened alert. The combination of technological anomalies, psychological effects, and partial leaks created a feedback loop that amplified the sense of urgency and danger. Internal memos warned that the anomaly's adaptive intelligence, coupled with humanity's continued observation, could produce consequences beyond comprehension. NASA's anomaly team faced a stark reality. The universe they were studying was not passive, and every probe, every signal, and every observation had the potential to trigger responses with far-reaching and unpredictable effects. The 13th phase ended with a clear understanding. The anomaly was no longer simply an object of study. It was an active force, interacting with human technology, cognition, and perception. The restricted zones had become arenas of both discovery and risk, and the line between observation and provocation had blurred entirely. NASA's team stood at a precipice, aware that the next phase of engagement could bring revelation, catastrophe, or both, and that the universe itself was no longer a silent witness but a participant in humanity's unfolding story. The 14th phase of NASA's anomaly program began under a cloud of escalating tension. The combination of technological failures, psychological strain, and partial leaks of classified information had created a situation that the agency could no longer ignore. The anomaly, once a distant and enigmatic signal, had evolved into a force that actively interacted with human instruments, cognition, and observation, making containment and control increasingly urgent. The first response was operational. NASA immediately enacted a series of emergency measures designed to stabilize missions and protect personnel. Access to restricted zones was limited to the smallest possible cohort, and all new probe deployments were suspended pending a full review of prior data. Autonomous drones were equipped with enhanced fail-safes, including self-shutdown protocols if structural anomalies exceeded safety thresholds. Redundant communication channels were established, allowing Earth-based teams to monitor multiple signals simultaneously in case of data corruption or interference. Every instrument and system underwent rigorous recalibration to account for adaptive responses from the anomaly. Simultaneously, psychological support for the anomaly team was intensified. Embedded psychologists conducted continuous evaluations, providing counseling, monitoring for cognitive disruptions, and issuing guidance on mitigating perceptual distortions. Special attention was paid to personnel who had reported vivid hallucinations, intrusive thoughts, or feelings of being observed. Internal reports noted that exposure to restricted zones data could produce effects ranging from mild disorientation to severe cognitive stress, and interventions were implemented to reduce time spent in direct analysis and to rotate shifts more frequently. Containment of information became an equally urgent priority. The agency reinforced security protocols, encrypting all communications, limiting access to classified data, and monitoring external networks for signs of leaks. Internal audits were conducted to identify vulnerabilities, and personnel were reminded of the severe consequences of unauthorized disclosure. Despite these precautions, independent observers continued to detect faint signals consistent with restricted zones activity, demonstrating that the anomaly's influence extended beyond the immediate control of the program. NASA recognized that containment was not only procedural but now a strategic necessity. Emergency protocols also addressed the technological threat. Analysis of prior probe failures revealed that the anomaly was capable of manipulating physical and electromagnetic environments in ways that could destroy instruments, corrupt data, or displace equipment unpredictably. In response, the team designed probes with adaptive shielding, redundant power systems, and autonomous avoidance algorithms. Simulations were conducted to predict potential interactions, but even the most advanced models could not fully anticipate the anomaly's adaptive intelligence. Internal memos emphasized that every deployment carried risk, and that caution must outweigh curiosity at every decision point. The anomaly's responses grew increasingly sophisticated. Energy patterns and structural shifts suggested that it not only observed human actions but interpreted intent, adapting to anticipate probe movements, signal transmissions, and even observational patterns. Analysts began referring to this capability as predictive adaptation, a phenomenon in which the anomaly appeared to simulate human behavior and respond preemptively. Internal communications noted the chilling implication: humanity's engagement was no longer one-sided. Observation, interaction, and decision-making had become a dynamic negotiation with an intelligence whose scope and intent were unknown. Ethical considerations dominated emergency planning. Internal debates raged over whether continued engagement was defensible, given the risks to personnel, technology, and potentially the planet. Some advocated complete withdrawal, arguing that no knowledge was worth provoking an adaptive intelligence of such magnitude. Others insisted that cautious observation must continue, emphasizing the unprecedented scientific opportunity. Leadership ultimately balanced these concerns by implementing stringent operational limits while maintaining ongoing observation of restricted zones under controlled conditions. Despite these measures, the anomaly demonstrated subtle breaches of control. Probes operating at the periphery of the zones exhibited minor but consistent deviations from predicted trajectories. Energy readings fluctuated unexpectedly, and data streams occasionally carried signals that could not be accounted for by human instruments. Analysts interpreted these anomalies as reminders that the universe being studied was neither passive nor fully understandable, and that every measure of control was provisional, contingent, and incomplete. By the end of this phase, the anomaly program had entered a state of heightened vigilance. Emergency measures had stabilized operations temporarily, but they did not eliminate the fundamental challenge. The anomaly remained adaptive, intelligent, and capable of influencing technology and perception. Restricted zones were no longer merely locations of interest. They were active, responsive environments where human action produced consequences that could not be fully predicted or contained. NASA's anomaly team faced the stark reality that the universe itself had become a participant in their work, and that observation, interaction, and control were intertwined in a delicate and potentially dangerous balance. The 14th phase concluded with an urgent recognition. The next stage of engagement could escalate the anomalies' responses, provoke new consequences, or reveal further intelligence. Emergency measures provided temporary stability, but they were not a solution. Humanity's pursuit of understanding had entered uncharted territory, where curiosity, caution, and survival were inseparable, and where the universe had demonstrated that knowledge and risk were inextricably linked. The 15th and final phase of NASA's anomaly program was defined by tension, revelation, and consequence. After months of secret missions, internal crises, technological failures, and psychological strain, the agency faced the culmination of human engagement with the anomaly. Restricted zones, once abstract regions of curiosity, had become domains of adaptive intelligence, reshaping space, energy, and perception in response to observation. Humanity's presence in these zones had provoked responses that could no longer be fully contained or predicted. The culmination began with a series of unprecedented events. Probes and autonomous drones reported energy surges far exceeding prior measurements, accompanied by structural shifts in formations within the zones that were both immense and precise. These movements suggested not random behavior, but intentional rearrangement, as if the anomaly were communicating or demonstrating capabilities previously unimaginable. Analysts noted correlations between human observation patterns and anomaly responses, confirming that the phenomenon had evolved from a passive object into an active participant in its own right. Simultaneously, psychological and cognitive effects among personnel reached critical intensity. Analysts reported intense hallucinations, pervasive auditory and visual phenomena, and intrusive thoughts directly linked to patterns observed in the restricted zones. Some described geometric structures appearing in everyday environments, pulses echoing in dreams, and an overwhelming sensation of being observed. Internal reports emphasized that exposure to anomaly data could influence perception, decision-making, and emotional stability, and that these effects were amplified by repeated engagement. Even the most experienced scientists struggled to distinguish objective observation from subjective experience. The program faced external pressure as well. Independent observatories and private astronomers had begun publishing fragmented reports of unusual cosmic structures and energy signals, sparking widespread curiosity and concern. Although most accounts were incomplete, they demonstrated that containment was failing. The anomaly's influence, either directly or through technological observation, had become partially visible to the broader universe. NASA recognized that the anomaly's reach extended beyond the immediate restricted zones, and that the act of observation itself had consequences that were global in scope. Internal debates escalated to a final crisis. Some factions argued for complete withdrawal, claiming that continued engagement risked provoking responses beyond human comprehension. Others advocated cautious observation, emphasizing that retreat would forfeit unparalleled scientific discovery.